In 1977, General Ziaul Haq stages a coup and for the next decade attempts to legitimize his violation of the constitution by a ruse to Islamize Pakistan. And he makes women the prime targets of very punitive and repressive laws and policies. Rubina Sehgal, who has been a leading feminist scholar of Pakistan, she points out that feminism at this time in the 1980s becomes more radical. It's a time period when women are leading very courageous and sustained street resistance against General Ziaul Haq's military dictatorship. Asma Jahangir and Hina Jalani fought legal cases for women and minorities along with other members of their all-women founded legal firm AGHS, which included Sheila Zia. And in 1988, Benazir Bhutto returns from exile after General Ziaul Haq is killed in a plane crash. Benazir Bhutto is elected as Prime Minister. She's the first woman leader in the Muslim world. She launched a mass-scale pre- and postnatal outreach service led by women called the Lady Health Workers Program. In 1995, we see a lot of women-led NGOs or non-governmental organizations who prepared thematic policies and participated in the 4th UN World Conference on Women held in Beijing. So in 1973, we did have a new constitution which gave more rights to women than in the past. Article 25, which is often cited, said that every citizen was equal before the law. And Article 25(2) stated there would be no discrimination based on sex alone. Article 27 gives fundamental rights, stated there would be no discrimination based on race, religion, caste or sex for appointment in the services of Pakistan. But a contradictory set of religious layering confirmed the desecularization of this constitution as well. It's not what is sometimes said to be a secular or an ideal constitution. In 1975, Pakistan was represented at the International Women's Year, the United Nations Conference, by the Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's wife, Nusrat Bhutto, and she signed what is called the Mexico Declaration. And these promoted a lot of rights that was implemented in Pakistan, including the setting up of creches in the public sector, etc. So Pakistan was taking a front sort of space or lead in terms of the rights that were being promoted and advocated for and institutionalized for women. Other state institutions also had a global reputation, like the national carrier PIA, and women's involvement and women's services in public sphere and their presence in public sphere was not really up for debate. Like I said, it was part of the engineering and the steaming ahead of modernity for Pakistan. In 1977, General Ziaul Haq stages a coup and for the next decade attempts to legitimize his violation of the constitution by a ruse to Islamize Pakistan. And he makes women the prime targets of very punitive and repressive laws and policies, especially what is named the Hudud Ordinances, which was part of a series of Islamic laws, one of which was the Zina Ordinance, which criminalized all extramarital sex, and it compounded rape with fornication or sexual activities or sexual behavior, which was only amended in 2006 after a very strong resistance and a campaign by the women's movements over the 1990s. And I'll just show you some of this activism. Rubina Sehgal, who has been a leading feminist scholar of Pakistan, she points out that feminism at this time in the 1980s becomes more radical. And it's a time period when women are leading very courageous and sustained street resistance against General Ziaul Haq's military dictatorship. So we see, for example, over here, the movement for the restoration of democracy. They have rural women uprisings under the Sindhiani Tehreek. In Sindh, we have women in students, women in trade unions, and it is a period of what can be called an intersectional feminism peaks at this time. There's quite a bit of literature around this as well. In 1981, the Femida and Allah Bucks Allah Bakhsh case filed under the Zina Ordinance motivated women to form the Women's Action Forum in Karachi. And in 1983, they led a street protest in Lahore against the proposed discriminatory law of evidence. And here they were tear gassed, and some of them were arrested as well. The law was eventually diluted, the law of evidence, in response to the pressure of the protest, and a proposed law of the hijab or imposed veil was also stymied and prevented. A prominent human rights lawyers, Asma Jahangir and Hina Jalani, fought legal cases for women and minorities, along with other members of their all-women founded legal firm, AGHS, which included Sheila Zia. And in 1983, the Ansari report of the Council of Islamic Ideology recommended again that women's participation in politics should be very limited and only nominated women over the age of 50. There was also protests or objections or recommendations that women cannot serve as judges in the Federal Shariat Court. All of these were sort of backlashes or a series of backlash that women's groups and feminists were contending and fighting against. A backlash against prior rights, but also fighting new challenges and new prevention of rights or promotion. So women have been fighting on both fronts historically, as well as in terms of anticipation of new rights. So women's organizations at this time, like Shirkat Gah and the Aurat Foundation and the Women's Front, were formed to work on rights-based development and political mobilization. Sindhyani Tehreek that I mentioned was the women's wing of the Awami Tehreek, which was a Marxist party. It mobilized a peasant women's movement in the province of Sindh, and it launched a grassroots feminist struggle for women's rights, for national democracy, provincial autonomy, and importantly, for secular opposition to religious orthodoxy, as well as for class equality. And in 1988, Benazir Bhutto returns from exile after General Ziaul Haq is killed in a plane crash, and Benazir Bhutto is elected as Prime Minister. She's the first woman leader in the Muslim world. She launched a mass-scale pre- and postnatal outreach service led by women called the Lady Health Workers Program, which is one of the biggest programs in the world. And other feminists take up very prominent positions in this period. So it's an important, not just symbolic, but practical result from a kind of a liberal dispensation under Benazir Bhutto. So we have not just women who are in the profession, but also in high-risk positions like pursuing human rights, pursuing women's rights, and media freedom. So we have, so for example, on top we have Benazir Bhutto and Sherry Rahman on the top left, and Sherry Rahman has been editor of Herald magazine. Later she was in Benazir's government and currently a senator. The late Asma Jahangir, champion of women's rights, human rights, and set up the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan. On the top then is Rubina Sehgal, prominent feminist scholar, did a lot of work on education and a kind of a feminist historiography, the closest that we have to an in-depth one in Pakistan. Top right, we have the late Razia Bhatti, who has been the very courageous editor of Newsline, which was an all-women's publication for a little while. And at the bottom, you have Benazir Bhutto, you have Amina Janjua, who has led the Lady Health Workers Program's rights demands for regularization and for wages, and the late Tahira Mazhar Ali on the right. As I mentioned, she has been sort of inspirational and at the forefront of Marxist possibilities and Marxist ideology in Pakistan. So by this time in 1995, we see a lot of women-led NGOs or non-governmental organizations who prepared thematic policies and participated in the 4th UN World Conference on Women held in Beijing. And actually they mobilized all women across the rural and urban sectors and different classes. It was a very inclusive process. This sort of throw away criticism of NGOs. Some criticism is very valid, but this idea that they're all elite urban women is so misplaced, and it's ahistorical and inaccurate in many places. It was a very inclusive, and outreach was very important, getting women, spreading awareness, consciousness raising, but also including them in women's policies, ideologies, and representation was part of a lot of NGO, women's NGO movements. And at the Fourth World Conference in 1995 in Beijing, Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto participates, and that's when she signs the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. That was a major milestone, but there was lots of opposition from signing this from the religious party of the Jamaat-e-Islami. And a year before, she participated at the International Conference for Population Development in Egypt. She was, I think, perhaps one of two women leaders from the Muslim world, because everybody else refused to participate in population development because it was a controversial subject. So these were important sort of not just policies, but also the decisions to signal a kind of a defiance to conservative forces, and also to signal to the world that Pakistan is going to backing and be sponsoring women's rights regardless of the opposition. In 1997, after decades of an informal ban on women's participation in sports, I mean, women are not participating in any international or regional sports in Pakistan since General Zia-ul Haq. But in 97, the first women's cricket team was formed and permitted to play at international levels.